Decriminalization is not legalization.
Smoking weed is not a good idea. I've tried it back in the days and it was worse than anything that happened to Hunter Biden. Don't do drugs.
If a shop sells cannabis, no one will again buy it from the street. No way. Millions like myself smoke it every day. Please take control of it. Use the money to support communities. Take the cash from the wrong hands. Legalize cannabis. If you smoke weed,
nobody likes you. And you're literally paying for your plant.
Weed doesn't make you lazy. You're just lazy and using weed as an excuse.
Marijuana hijacks normal brain functioning in teens.
No one should be in prison for weed.
So my name is Yao Yoboa, out of Mafeking. Grew up there, but originally from Ghana, hence the name. And I think I'm an ardent cannabis advocate since about 2018. Prior to that, I think like the rest of Africa, South Africa, there was a lot of stigma around cannabis, which I also saw the stigma of, where people who consume cannabis were looked at a certain way. And then around 2018, I started consuming myself, and then I realized it was actually not as bad as I thought it was. And I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, so I saw an opportunity to actually go into the space and create value and benefit for people around cannabis.
So I knew about cannabis a long time ago. I knew about it for recreational purposes, and it's something that I felt intrigued me, and it was something I liked, and I always, kind of had this feeling that there was more to cannabis other than just getting you high. I think the attitude, the stigma, it's always been a negative attitude towards cannabis in South Africa, and since it's been legalized and over the years, I don't really see that it's changed much in any way. What has happened is people, because of the gold rush or the green rush and thinking about the opportunities of making money, several people that were against it one day before it was legalized are now for it, in the sense that, hey, I can open a business, I can grow this stuff, I can make money. They're not actually for it to say, hey, you know what, let's use this to uplift our community, let's use this to heal people.
So myself, I come from a film background. For the last 25 years, I was in the industry as a producer, editor, director, etc. And I think my interest that came into this industry was after my parents died from cancer. So my father had prostate cancer, and then he basically died from malignant cancer. And then my mother in 2016 died from breast cancer. So during that time when they were sick, I noticed that a lot of the time they didn't focus on nutrition, which were the doctors. They didn't focus on alternative treatments. It was all basically chemotherapy and radiation. And so I started researching on what are the other modalities that are out there that people could use, which are less invasive as chemo and radiation. And cannabis oil kept on coming up. And I guess the week that I found someone to supply me with the oil in 2016, my mother died on that weekend. So after that, I just realized how much ignorance that I have in regards to cannabis. And then I think that's when sort of like my journey started with it. Prior to that, I hadn't been using cannabis at all for myself personally. But as soon as I started becoming more comfortable with the plant, then now I guess, it led to us being where we are at now. One of the big things that we do here at Chiba Cannabis Academy is that we sort of illustrate and unpack the opportunities for our students. I deal a lot with the parents, and the parents are asking me, is there an industry? I pay this money, what will my child be able to learn after this? Will there be a job for them to have? If you had come to me 2 years ago and asked me that same question, I would have said no, there is no opportunities or jobs currently available, but that's all changed in the last 2 years. And I think on the back of the SONA sort of pronouncements by our president, that's sort of like indicated that there is an appetite from government for the actual industry to take flight.
Last year, we committed to unlocking investment in the hemp and cannabis sector. We are moving to create the enabling conditions for this sector to grow.
Legislatively and legally, if you are found with cannabis, technically what you've done is against the law, but them arresting you technically is then against your constitutional right. So that's really where the gray area is coming from, is that on one hand you're allowed to, but then the law doesn't have the structures to allow you to, unless it's in your house, private consumption, private space, but then the law doesn't know what all of that means. And that's really where we are in South Africa, is the law from 2018, the law doesn't really understand what to do about cannabis because people are allowed to, it's part of their constitutional right, but legally speaking, it's against the Drug Trafficking Act. So how do we then go about navigating that? Cannabis as a gateway drug is one of the biggest fallacies that came out of the war on drugs. Essentially, the only reason it really became a gateway to any sort of drug was simply because you had to go to places where drugs were sold in order to purchase it or consume it. So that then did come along with upselling. Drug dealers would upsell drugs to people who had come to buy cannabis. So that's why it's very important to legislate and regulate cannabis, because that is how you remove it from children. That's how you make it safe for children.
Anyone can abuse anything. So there's people who abuse water, there's people who abuse pain tablets, there's people who abuse alcohol, which we've seen. So it's like a little strange that, okay, it's okay for us to consume all this other stuff which is legalized, but we all know it causes massive harm for people. But with cannabis, you have to look at it on a different stage. So that in its own comes with its own stigma, that on its own comes with its own conspiracy theories, which I have and everybody else from the industry shares. But ultimately, when it does become legalized, I don't foresee it causing people to escalate their consumption to cocaine and drug. If that was the case, that would be happening already. So not to say that cannabis is harmless, it's just to say that it's less of a harm than the other sort of like addictive drugs that are out there.
Once we change the stigma, once we change the perspective of how cannabis is viewed, then we can have the conversation of who is it really safe for, or how are we keeping it away from certain groups that shouldn't have it. But because of the misinformation, that's why it gets found in places where you have alcohol consumption. And as I said earlier, alcohol and cannabis for me, they're kind of incongruent. They don't really go together. One makes you want to sit down and relax, the other one makes you want to get up and go and have fun.
I think the ironic thing about cannabis is that we have legal alcohol that we can drink, but we know that when people drink alcohol, they kill everybody if they drive, or they abuse people. But that's legal, it's totally fine. But all of a sudden, with this plot, where they haven't proven any of sort of the stigma that's been around and attached to it, but still we're pushing for it to be illegal, even though we have clinical proof that has showcased that people have been able to heal themselves using cannabis. And I think the challenge there is getting government involved in terms of them being aware of sort of like where the shortcomings are currently. So those are the things that I think need to be sort of tackled. I just wish government would, approach people who actually know the industry ins and outs, and also the experts, so that they can lend their ear towards actually addressing some of these issues.